The hall smelled of polish and old wood the way a school smells on results day, when every footstep sounds too loud. Ceiling fans drew slow circles over the community hall in Clifton, their pull chains clinking like faraway spoons. A mic waited on a bare lectern. The banner behind it read Residents Association Emergency Session. Black letters on white cloth, edge frayed where someone had tugged too hard. The chairs were metal and pragmatic. I had chosen the second row, center aisle, because that's where you can see the faces and watch the hands. On stage, 3 of them, the association chair, his deputy. And the treasurer shifted papers with deliberate care, telegraphing confidence. The chair kept touching his wrist as if checking a watch he didn't wear. I felt the bracelet against my skin, the same thin silver bangle that had drawn a laugh in court. The prosecutor's smirk had bounced off the gallery like a thrown coin. The magistrate's mouth had pressed into a line. "In my courtroom, we observe decorum," she'd said, glancing at the bangle as though I'd worn a siren. But decorum cuts both ways, I'd learned, and I'd filed an injunction before the echo died. Now we were here in the hall where community gossip becomes community record, where microphones magnify quiet facts until the room resizes around them. There were residents, staff in blue waistcoats, a couple of reporters, the bank manager who'd agreed to attend if he could sit near the exit. The treasurer's son hovered near the stage steps, the way people hover near exits when they know they'll need them later. The stakes were simple. My name, my father's house. The sliver of reputation that lets you sign your signature without feeling it wobble. It looks small on paper. It feels heavy when you breathe. In the next minutes, you'll see how a bracelet misjudged became a lever, and how I stapled words to consequences until the room fell quiet. I listened to the fans, the scuff of chairs. Across the aisle, a neighbor fanned herself with an envelope, the flap soft from use. 2 rows behind, a phone camera pointed down like a patient hunter. Near the back, a man in a white shalwar kameez leaned against the wall with a stillness that says plainclothes louder than a badge. I'd invited him too, though no one knew. The deputy chair examined a folded sheet. The pattern of his eyes told me he'd read this same line 3 times. The treasurer drummed his fingers on the table for taps. Pause. 4 taps paused the rhythm of a man who wants the first microphone. On the right edge of the stage, the community hall's glass door had a crack like a thin lightning bolt. Through it, the afternoon light fell in a pale slant over the first row, catching the dust motes until they looked like a quiet snow. A young woman squeezed into the seat beside me and whispered without looking my way, "Your lawyer's here." He brought a red folder. "Good," I said. Advocate Rahim liked red for anything he planned to say in public. He claimed it photographed better. Really, he liked the way a red folder suggested an emergency you could resolve with process. There were 2 micro-mysteries that had been following me like sparrows, small and persistent. One was a phrase the treasurer kept using in emails, as per verbal as if speech had binding force without paper. The other was a key I'd found in my father's study, taped inside an old finance book, labeled with a single letter V. I had placed it in my purse alongside the bracelet. The night the courtroom air turned brittle, and I made a vow to stay in my voice no matter who tried to pick it. The chair cleared his throat and spoke into the mic. "Neighbors, we are here to address reckless allegations levied against this association in court and on social media by Ms. Aliyah Khan." He did not look at me. He looked at a point above the audience where it was safe to be brave. "Today, we will put things to rest." People love the phrase "put things to rest." It promises sleep, not resolution. I let them have the illusion because a few days earlier in the city court on Emagina Road, I had learned how they thought of me and my wrist. It was a packed docket. The courtroom was high-ceilinged with paint that had never been quite white. The air conditioning worked hard and failed softly, so the room was cool enough to keep tempers from sweating. The magistrate's hair was tidy in a way that suggests a personal system for everything. The prosecutor, a man whose suit could afford its own car, introduced the Residents Association as if it were a charity, not a limited liability society that had learned what you can do with signatures. When I stepped forward to submit a motion to protect records during discovery, I did so the way I do most things, with the file already tabbed, citations ready. The timeline printed on a sheet that fit in a judge's hand without feeling bossed. It was then the prosecutor smirked, and the magistrate's eyes flicked to my bracelet. And I learned something I'd known but never had proof of. Some people will use anything to put you at a social disadvantage they can later call tone. The bracelet was thin and unassuming. It was also mine, purchased in Seder when I first started as a junior compliance analyst and vowed to wear one thing that reminded me I was not disposable. Is that appropriate for court? The magistrate had asked with a tired grace I did not envy, as if the bracelet were a question mark. I had set my palm on the table's edge. Your Honor, I said, I'm here on a motion to enjoin the destruction or transfer of records under Rule 12b and Section 151 CPC. I understand decorum. So do they. The prosecutor started to speak. The magistrate lifted a finger and the room reset. I filed the motion, stamped, received, and I heard someone behind me exhale. My hands were steady. The bracelet sat where it always sits. In that moment, with everyone watching, where my hand had been. I spoke quiet enough for the people who mattered to hear, clear enough for the mic to catch. You picked the wrong wrist today. They heard what they were meant to hear. I was not scolding. I was setting a baseline. Outside, the hallway smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. I texted a single line to Rahim. Injunction filed, priority. Preserved bank logs plus vendor contracts plus security footage. He sent back a checkmark and then, delightfully on the nose, bracelet. Okay? I sent him the reverse smile emoji and walked to the registry to get certified copies of what I had just filed. Because certified copies are how your hands stay warm in rooms where other people hold the thermostat. The clerk had a nail color like rose tea. She stamped and slid my papers back without looking up. The key labeled V sat in my purse, quiet as a promise. Back in the hall, the treasurer had already taken the mic and was working his practiced casual. We have been attacked, he said, by someone with a personal vendetta. The association operates above board. As per verbal agreements with our vendors, many records are not retained beyond audit thresholds and thus cannot be produced. As per verbal. There it was, falling into the air like a card placed on the table far too slowly. I let him continue. The deputy chair nodded at each sentence as if he were signing his chin the pen. The room warmed. The smell of varnish thickened. A girl from the press took notes on her phone, thumb quick. Eyes bored that. Least until she glanced at me, then back at the stage, then back at me again. I had filed an injunction. The bank had frozen a tranche of association funds pending inquiry. Rumors had not been kind to the machine they had built. The machine had rusted in predictable places. 6 months earlier, I'd moved back into my father's house to manage his chemo schedule and keep the roof from following gravity too aggressively. I'd taken a sabbatical from my firm. Compliance doesn't stop. It pauses with notes and began reviewing household accounts. The community association had raised fees without proper notice. Then levied a security upgrade surcharge that turned out to be fencing upgraded at 4 houses and a camera pointed at a fig tree. When I asked for invoices, the treasurer sent screenshots with vendor names cropped out and wrote, "As per verbal, we deal with the owner directly." I asked to see the owner. In Dubai right now, I ask for contracts. They're standard. I asked to see the standard form. As per verbal. Then a notice arrived threatening to revoke my parking access if I did not pay the surcharge at once. The tone was a little smug. The way a text can be when someone thinks they've tagged you the way stray animals are tagged in parks. Before I argue, I read. My father had kept everything bills bundled by year with rubber bands gone brittle, bank books wrapped in newspaper. In a drawer that was locked with a key no one had seen, I found the old finance book. The key labeled V taped inside. The drawer held a ring binder with minutes from the association's earliest meetings. A partnership deed for a parking lot lease I hadn't known existed. and a trust document with clauses that looked like a man's attempt to speak to his daughter even, when he knew his voice would soon go elsewhere. The trust had an audit clause, simple, sturdy. If the association charged beyond CPI increases without disclosing the full basis in writing, any beneficiary could demand an audit at the association's expense, enforceable by injunction, with custodial control of relevant records granted temporarily to the lead beneficiary's designated agent. My father had named me his agent. I held the paper in my hands and let my breath slow until I could hear my pulse. I didn't shout. I used process and receipts. I called Rahim because he enjoys a clean clause the way chefs enjoy a sharp knife. He read the trust while I prepared a matrix, charges, dates, minutes where any justification appeared, copies of receipts, gaps where receipts should have been. I cross-referenced the surcharge with a bank transfer described as Global Sec, installments, then another to RS Developments and another to an entity named Varka V. I took a picture of the tape on the key. I wrote an email to the bank manager, Mr. Qureshi, who has a remarkable capacity for asking a simple question and then letting you fill the silence. I asked whether any scheduled transfers were pending from the association's account to any of the above, and whether any internal triggers had been hit by keyword or amount. He asked me to come in person. I did, with my folder, my silent bracelet, and a recorder that clicks once when it's on and then forgets it is there. The bank smelled like new money and old pens. I sat across from Qureshi while he worked the terminals with a patience that felt like respect. He didn't say much. He lifted his eyes and asked a question that told me he'd read everything. Do you want a soft hold or a hard freeze? Soft, I said. For now. We requested the soft hold on outgoing wires above a threshold we agreed would draw attention without setting off sirens. He sent internal emails, the kind that starts audits faster than temper does, and escalated the matter too. Compliance with a note about community funds and trust obligations. I forwarded my motion draft to Rahim. We met in his office, set the language to keep it complete but not aggressive, and filed it the next morning, notarized the same afternoon. We served notice to the association secretary with a courier slip that marked the time to the minute. When the treasurer texted to say, "This is harassment," I replied with the clause number and an invitation to submit full records within 3 business days. Certified with a complete vendor list, the partnership deed for the parking lot lease, and the original security vendor's name and address. He sent back as per verbal. I was never going to rely on his pen. I filed a complaint with the Registrar of Societies, attaching copies of minutes where notice procedures had not been followed, and requested an inspection. I emailed the private security company whose name had been semi-visible in a lazy screenshot and asked for a service agreement. They replied that they had no current contract with the association, had not for a year, and would be happy to, quote, afresh. I logged that. I called our neighbor, Uncle Bashir, who, for all his jokes, remembers numbers when bills do not. He remembered the treasurer's son delivering envelopes personally twice last winter. Eager boy, he said. Smiles like he's selling a car. Asked me to pay cash for the surcharge so it would clear faster. I wrote a check. I traced checks through the bank. One was deposited into an account with an alias that matched RS Developments. I requested the account's true name via a formal inquiry from my counsel, citing the trust's audit, right? The bank acknowledged. Qureshi called me and asked whether we intended to go public. Only with facts, I said. He said good the way a man says good when he's not giving you permission, but acknowledging a shared line. By then, the association had started to panic in small ways. The parking guards changed posts with unusual frequency. The cleaning staff, who always know before anyone else knows, stopped making eye contact with the treasurer when he passed. In the park, a woman in sunglasses asked me at dusk whether I wasn't embarrassed to cause trouble while my father was unwell. I had removed 3 nails from the tire of his old car that week. Embarrassment is a poor glue for duty. I took pictures of the nails and filed a police complaint. Narrow and focused, not an accusation, just a report. The complaint drew a patrol through our lane at random times for the next 10 days. Presence is a text that reads itself. The day before the emergency session, a sealed envelope arrived at my gate. The courier's receipt said Varka. Inside was a key identical to mine and a folded sheet. A vendor master list that began 3 years earlier and ended last month, with amounts, dates, and a handwritten note in the corner. This is not what I signed. No signature. No name. A hidden lever breathes before you pull it. The session began with rehearsed outrage and smoothed paper edges. The treasurer talked about decorum. The deputy talked about community. The chair asked for calm. They let the air grow fuzzy with generalities until someone could say, "So in short," and suggest we all move on. They misread the room. They misread me. I carry a scanner in my head and a habit of sitting where I can plug facts into power. When the mic came, I did not address them. I addressed the room. My name is Aliyah Khan. The trust clause is 9C. 3 weeks ago, I requested invoices for surcharge items. In response, I received screenshots with vendor names obscured. I invoked the audit, right? 2 days later, our bank represented here by Mr. Quresh placed a soft hold on certain transfers pending the audit. 5 days later, someone slipped a vendor list under my door. I held up a copy, time-stamped when I received it. Witness notation by my neighbor, Sana. A forensic accountant I'd asked to sit 3 rows back. I have reason to believe that RS Developments, ostensibly a contractor, shares beneficial ownership with the treasurer's family. I also have reason to believe that the parking lot lease revenue has been recorded off books under an entity named Varka. Silence is a muscle. When it flexes, rooms shrink. The treasurer started to speak. I lifted my hand slightly. Let me finish. Today, we'll either agree on a full, certified audit under Clause 9C, with custody of records transferred to the designated agent. I tap the red folder, or I will file to convert the soft hold to a freeze. Request appointment of a receiver for the funds in question. And cite noncompliance with the court's injunction. I didn't look at my bracelet. I let others look. The girl with the press badge stopped typing and just listened. The man in shalwar kameez near the back wrote nothing at all and watched like a person watching a fuse approach a match. I walked through the receipts in beats, letting each one land. The wire IDs, the dates, the amounts piggybacking on holidays when no one checks emails. The courier slip timestamp. It's the affidavits we prepared where identity mattered and the redactions where it didn't. Rahim took the mic to read a portion from the trust. His voice, the sound of paper becoming a road. Sana spoke briefly about how the numbers moved. Qureshi cleared his throat once and said that if the association agreed to full cooperation, the bank would continue to facilitate operations, but that any attempt to transfer funds to the named entities would trigger a hold escalation and a report to the regulator. Uncle Bashir added a single sentence. I want to know where my money went. Power, when it moves with minimal adjectives, looks like this. The chair tried a smile that assumed we were all reasonable people. Surely we need not bring the bank into our internal matters, he said, then glanced at the deputy, then at the treasurer. The treasurer tapped the table with his pens for taps. Pause. That's what happens, I said softly into the mic, when internal matters are used to do external damage. The deputy chair raised a point about reputational harm. The journalist raised a point about public interest. The treasurer's son stood at the edge of the stage, took one step onto it, then stopped, his hand half in his pocket, missing whatever cue he'd practiced for this moment. He looked like a boy who had watched a door swing shut slowly and not moved to hold it. I brought out the key. 3 years ago, the association leased the parking lot at the East Gate to a private operator. The partnership deed shows a revenue share to the association. The trust clause requires that revenue to be credited against member fees before any surcharge is levied. The deed was kept in a locked drawer in my father's study. The key was taped into a finance book with the letter V. A second key arrived yesterday in a sealed envelope marked Varka. I held up the envelope. When I gave the clerk at the registry the entry number for the deed, she found the registration had been delayed and the signatures updated 1 year after the original execution. The update removed the crediting clause. The witnesses, it turns out, were 2 members of the treasurer's extended family. Soft noise from the back. Someone muttered, "Allah." "The association can fix this," I said. "We can vote now to appoint an independent auditor. Grant custodial control of records for 30 days. Notify the Bank of Cooperation. Freeze transfers to RS Developments and Varka pending authentication of beneficial ownership. And correct the registry by attaching the original deed. Or we can continue to pretend we are talking about decorum." I looked straight at the chair. "You know my wrist." The chair's smile died. The treasurer finally took the mic as if it might bite. "This is slander," he said. "The documents Sifril are stolen. And Ms. Khan is biased. Her father failed to pay on time and she is trying to embarrass us. There is a technique for handling such sentences. You don't swat at each fly. You turn on the fan." I asked Sana to display 2 pages on the small projector the hall kept for weddings. The first showed the notice I had received with the surcharge, time-stamped. The second showed the bank credit for my payment, received 2 days prior to the notice. "I paid early," I said to the room. And when they threatened to revoke my parking card, I documented the threat and asked for governing records. I received screenshots with vendor names blurred. I asked to see contracts. I was told as per verbal. I filed an injunction to preserve records. "We are here because some of you asked for receipts." I brought them. The man in shalwar kameez shifted, then slid his hands into his pockets the way a person does when he is near his professional comfort zone. The journalist caught his movement and then looked away so as not to scare it. The treasurer's mouth tightened. He said the wrong name for the security vendor, the one from 2 years ago. It was the only stumble he made all night. It was enough. In receipt land, a wrong noun is a staircase. "Shall we vote?" the chair asked, trying to recapture the act. The deputy read out a pre-written script line in light of harmful allegations and to avoid undue cost. "We propose a nominal review by our existing auditor, KVA, to be conducted within 7 days, without transfer of any records or access to bank statements, and to consider the matter closed thereafter." The line hung there, the word nominal, a neon arrow. I stepped close enough to the mic for the feedback to flirt and then vanish. A nominal review reviews nothing. We aren't doing theater. The heat rose under the fans. The light through the cracked glass door thinned as a cloud passed. We are doing custodial control, audited, certified, witnessed. We are doing transfer of custody, chain of evidence intact. We are doing this right now. Sometimes rooms change size without anyone moving. This one did when the chair looked not at me, but at the bank manager, who tapped his pen once and said, "If the association votes against a full audit in these circumstances, with an injunction pending, we will escalate and we will report." That's the ceiling fan hitting high. We voted. It was not close. The treasurer's family cluster abstained. The deputy looked like a person who had smiled too long in the sun. The chair announced the appointment of an independent auditor. Sanaa's firm recused and recommended another custodial transfer of records to Rahim's office for 30 days. An immediate notification to the bank. The journalist sent a text to someone and then pocketed her phone. The man in shalwar kameez left without calling attention to himself, which is his job. The treasurer's son took a step off the stage and found himself with nowhere first to put his foot. After, in the corridor where the hall keeps its spare chairs and forgotten banners, the treasurer approached me as if this were a misunderstanding we could tuck into, the way you tuck in a shirt. He stopped a meter away, as if remembering distance could be a politeness or an alibi. "You made enemies today," he said. "I make files," I said. "You made choices." The corridor smelled like dust and detergent. Somewhere, a cleaner's radio played a mournful love song at cheerful volume. I caught a whiff of diesel from the generator outside. The way heat smells when it has a budget? I did not look at his hands because I already knew how tightly he was holding them to his sides. He tilted his head, same rhythm as the four-taps pause. "You think a bracelet makes you brave?" I had already turned, so my response came over my shoulder, cleaner than if I'd looked back. "You picked the wrong wrist today." If there is mercy in these stories, it is usually small and late. I allowed myself none that night. I went home and wrote letters to the registrar, to the court, to the bank, filed, stamped, countersigned. We had the custodial transfer executed the next morning with witnesses. Each box taped, each drive sealed, each intake form time-stamped. We recorded serial numbers like people who intend to sleep later. We cataloged the parking lot lease payments and found for that had been redirected through a shell that led back to a cousin. We redacted names that would not add to the record and protected those who needed protecting. We cited, complied, escalated. We froze a second tranche when as per verbal became as per misunderstanding. We transferred the parking gate code, revoked the treasurer's override, and recorded the surrender. In Raheem's office, with the blinds half closed and the smell of old leather rising from the chairs, I watched as the auditor wrote. We found significant nonconformities. The days after a room falls silent are not movie days. They are form days. The hall doesn't remember you. The fans go on. People who were loud become helpful. People who were helpful become loyal. A neighbor I'd never liked brought mangoes and said nothing except, "For your father," and then left the way proper offerings leave. The treasurer resigned for family reasons. The deputy took an opportunity overseas that looked like a disciplinary leave with a passport. The chair stayed. He started learning. Policies got written so that no one would need to say as per verbal again unless they meant. I don't have it in writing, and I know I should. The bank unfroze the parts that deserved thaw. Caressy added a note to my file that said client understands procedures, which may be the most flattering sentence a banker writes. The parking lot revenue began to be credited before fees. The camera aimed at the fig tree was re-aimed at the gate where it should have looked all along. One afternoon, a courier brought a letter addressed to me in a hand that tried to be neat and landed on honest. No return address. Inside a single sheet. I'm sorry. It had a small grease mark in the corner where a thumb had held it. I could have done many things with that note. I did one. I placed it in a file divider titled After. My father's house stopped sounding like it was holding its breath. The generator chug turned familiar again, and the marble floors went from cold to cool. I took the bracelet off one evening and set it on the windowsill and watched how the last light of the day threaded itself through the loop and made a small, bright oval on the sill. I picked it up and put it back on. It wasn't a trophy. It was a habit. Weeks later, in the city court, the magistrate asked whether the association had complied. Raheem said yes. The prosecutor sounded like a man reading from a script someone else had edited. The magistrate nodded once, and the case file acquired a character I enjoy. When a matter that tried to be about personality becomes officially about process, outside in the hallway where the lemon cleaner never quite wins, I crossed paths with the treasurer's son. He looked like a person in an introduction. He said nothing. Neither did I. Mercy is a boundary with a kind voice. At home, I wrote instructions that would help the next person who needed to do this without shouting. How to notarize, when to serve, where to log courier slips. How to get a clerk to tell you what to write on the form so she can stamp it without saying you told her so. I printed a one-page checklist and taped it inside the cupboard with the tea. I called it Polite Fire. There was a small celebration. The kind that remembers what's real a dinner where the tablecloth wasn't ironed. Where Raheem told a terrible joke and Santa laughed because it was terrible. Where Uncle Bashir brought Kia that had the correct ratio of rice to remember when. The night was warm. The bulbs were soft. The cat we don't own decided to sleep under my chair. Zara, the journalist, arrived late, smelled like rain and ink, and asked for the story's small parts, the ones that won't trend. She asked whether I was tired. I said I was steady. She looked at the bracelet and smiled without making it a symbol. I made tea the way my mother did when the problem had stopped being the problem and started being the lesson. I saw the man in shalwar kameez again days after, in the lane near the fruit cellar. He nodded once. That was enough. There was one loop left, small and personal. The key labeled V. I went back to the drawer, now empty of secrets, and taped the key inside a different book. A volume of poems my father had read aloud when words were round and simple. I wrote a note and folded it around the key. V is for Varka, but also for voice. That's the thing about hidden levers. They are only dangerous when one person knows where they are. When many of us know, they become tools. On the day the association posted the new policies to the notice board printed. Signed, recorded, posted I. Watched a child point at the board and ask her mother what it meant. And the mother explained it like a recipe. Step by step, no magic. The hall was empty. The fans were off. The air held the pleasant stillness of work done to a finish. At the next community event, under a banner that didn't tug at its own string, I wore the bracelet because, why not? The chair greeted me like a person he had learned from. The new treasurer, young, overcautious in a useful way, asked me to review the draft vendor policy. I said I would and did, and removed 3 words unless mutually agreed. Loose doors are where rain comes in. We closed them. I walked home along the lane where dust turns quiet under tires. The guard at the gate nodded and wrote something in a log that would be legible later. The fig tree looked like it had always been there, which is a lie trees tell to be kind to us. Inside, my father slept. His breath clicked gentle. I heated dull. The smell of cumin rose like a good argument and settled like an answer. I sat at the table and wrote one more letter, this one to myself. Be precise. Be kind without the urge to be liked. File when you must. Serve when it matters. Record so you can remember why you did what you did. Don't crowd the edges of victory. They are where your foot might slip. And if someone tries to make the room about your wrist, let them learn the geometry of their error. At the next hearing, the magistrate glanced at my bracelet, and then at the file, and then at me. And her face did a small thing that might have been respect. We spoke little. The file spoke enough. After, as we descended the courthouse stairs, the prosecutor caught my eye and looked away quickly, embarrassed not because he had lost emotion, but because he had misread the variable that mattered. That's all right. We are all learning. When we finally closed the matter, I took the long road home by the sea. The air was salty and rough, the way money sometimes is, and the light catches on it in little chips. I stood by the rail and watched a boat move across a flat horizon with the stubbornness of the honest. The bracelet was cold where the wind found it. I said the line one last time, not to anyone in particular. Just to the memory of a room where someone thought a woman's wrist could be inventory with a social price tag. You picked the wrong wrist today. If you've ever had a room mistake your dignity for decoration. Share this with someone who needs the steps, not the speeches. And if you want more stories that turn quiet receipts into public reckoning, stick with Mile. Keep the kettle warm and the files open.